Okay, week 3, chapter 3. It is the day alone, and there are some pretty provocative statements that Bonhoeffer makes in there. Some interesting ones, some sometimes almost contradictory ones, but rather than contradictory, we're just going to say paradoxical. Yeah. So in the day alone, it starts off, says, quoting from Psalm 65, "The praise of silence befits you, O God, in Zion." He says many persons seek community because they're afraid of loneliness. More often than not, a few steps down, they are disappointed. Then they blame the community for what is really their own fault. Nobody's experienced anything like that, have they?
Was it this study we already talked about expectations, right?
That's right.
Expectations. Yeah, think carefully about what expectations you bring into a situation.
Oh boy, yeah, isn't that the truth? Well, he talks about, and this is actually on the next page, I guess, of the chapter. Well, another statement before we get there. He says, in reality, they're not seeking community at all, but only a thrill that will allow them to forget their isolation for a short time. Mm-hmm. Then he gives us the paradoxical approaches to community and solitude. He says, whoever cannot be alone should beware of community. And then he follows up with, and who cannot stand being in community should beware being alone. How are both true, and why are both of those true?
That's the question for us. How are both true and or not? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the first one. Whoever cannot be alone should beware of community. Well, you read on down a couple of sentences later, he says, alone you stood before God. Alone you had to take up your cross, struggle, and pray. Sorry. Alone you stood before God when God called you. Alone you had to obey God's voice. Alone you had to take up your cross, struggle, and pray. And alone you will die and give an account to God. You cannot avoid yourself, for it is precisely God who has singled you out. If you do not want to be alone, you're rejecting Christ's call to you, and you can have no part in the community of those who are called. Mm-hmm. Sounds a little existential, and Bonhoeffer has been accused of that many times. But he's talking about responsibility. Mm-hmm. The responsibility of responding to God's call, the responsibility of standing before God, the responsibility of obeying God's voice. That it's just, and Bonhoeffer will spend a lot of time talking about Christian responsibility. And in fact, he'll go so far as to say in his letters and papers from prison, he'll say, we should live in this world as though God had nothing to do with it, which just made the church folks set their hair on fire. What his point was, though, is the ethical responsibility of the Christians means we must take action. We must be accountable for our actions. We must do what we feel God has told us to do. And only alone can we bear that. He said that, so many times people want to abandon their responsibility of the future. Their responsibility for the present in hopes of a future that, frankly, we have no guarantee is coming. A lot of folks want to talk about end time stuff. They want to talk about prophecy this and prediction that. And he says that so many times we just sit back and think God will handle it all. Well, God will handle it all, but we happen to be the instruments. And it is alone that we are called to do that. Yes, of course, we all know that we're called in community also, but what is community, Dietrich would ask, except a collection of individuals, each one responsible to each other, but also each one responsible to the call of God that's in them.
So how about a show of hands? Who here prefers alone? Like, do you like to spend more time alone? You're like, I'm good alone?
Yeah.
How about those who like to be more in community? Or they're like, I want the people. Where are the people? I'm alone. Yeah, a little bit of company. No. But I was thinking about, Travis, and you said that, like, you know, what's the line again? Whoever cannot be alone should beware of community. So I was thinking about times I've been in a group, right, where there is somebody who either has been alone too much, needing the attention of that group, or has a hard time just being by themselves and sort of leans into the group a little more than is healthy. Is that something you've experienced in? I don't know.
Oh, sure. You know, it's the idea of introvert and extrovert certainly plays into it. And we always think that an introvert is a person who wants to be alone, or an introvert is shy. That's not it at all. An introvert is one who draws strength, they draw their energy in their alone times. An extrovert may be very quiet and may not talk at all, but they get their strength from being around people. I think we're all a little bit of both. I know that I like to be around people. I mean, you know, in fact, when we're not able to sit in the same place, I kind of miss it sometimes. But give me about an hour and I had enough. I'm good. You know, I'm ready to go back home. So, you know, when it comes to going to a long party or some long meeting or something like that, oh, it is just like, it's the kiss of death. I mean, but, you know, you go and you do. So I like my alone times, but I can function in a group. And those who love their time in groups should be able to function alone. Dietrich says, you got to be able to do both because we're called to do both.
He says, I think he says, even though you're in a group, you're supposed to still be in a word. That's what I got out of it.
Still be in
in the word.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah. You know, and we're called by the word, and we're in the word, and certainly it seems to me a lot of times that it's easier to be in the word when you're alone. When you're with a bunch of other people, you know, personalities being what they are, group dynamics being what they are, it kind of forces you into the word a little bit more, I think, sometimes. But yeah, in or out of a group, at the end of the day, being in the Lord, I mean, being in the Word is what we're called to be. Which is kind of, you kind of get to the gist of it all there, Raymond, because, you know, when he asked the question, you know, if you can't be alone, beware of being in community. And if you can't stand being in a community, beware of being alone. Well, I think you're right on. The key of it there is that in both of them, you're to be in the Word. He says in another place that, you know, how do I hear the voice of the Lord? I hear it in the voice of my brothers and sisters. When a brother and sister is talking to me, I should really count that as hearing from the Lord, because it's the Lord in them talking to me. We don't get to hear that when we're by ourselves. And that's why, you know, when you look back at church history, some of the great heretics were those who locked themselves away and didn't hold themselves accountable to anybody, and they didn't try out their ideas with anybody else. It's just they go off and they are right by themselves. They were called the Desert Fathers, some of them. Some of them got pretty wacky. That, you know, hey, I think this is what the Lord is telling me to do. Well, maybe it's just you've been in the Egyptian sun a little too long. And if you had, you know, Brother Raymond there with you or Brother Chuck there with you, it would kind of be like, no, you just need to rehydrate, brother. You know, so there's always kind of a practical application to being together as well. But exactly right, Raymond. Being in the Word is really the key to it all. That's how both can be true. Is when we're alone and we're in the Word, we can bring the Word to the community. When we're in the community, we can hear the Word and bring it back to our alone time also. Both of them actually wind up being extremely important. Pardon me. He says, well, we were talking about beware of being in community, but the reverse is also true. Whoever cannot stand being in community should beware of being alone. You are called into the community of faith. The call was not meant for you alone. You carry your cross, you struggle, and you pray in the community of faith, the community of those who are called. You're not alone even when you die. And on the day of judgment, you will be only one member of the great community of faith of Jesus Christ. If you neglect the community of other Christians, you reject the call of Jesus Christ. And thus your being alone can only become harmful to you. You know, the mystics of the Middle Ages, they love their alone time. But again, they missed out on the community. Now, some of them were members of the community. You think of somebody like Thomas Aquinas, and he was a member of the Benedictine Dominican order. And so he was always accountable to them. And no matter how much he wrote in his giant Summa Theologia, and you know, was famed for that, nothing like being with a bunch of other brother monks who will definitely keep your ego in check. That's also kind of a good thing. There's nothing like being amongst, and I'm going to talk about family as in brothers and sisters, to keep your ego in check. All you got to do is be in your family for just a few minutes, and they're like, oh yeah, remember when you wet your bed up until you were 15 years old, or, you know, whatever. Yeah, that's a humbling experience. But in the same way, the Christian community does that, but in a much more loving way. It's not a derisiveness. It's not an undercutting. It's simply by being in our presence with each other, it can be a humbling experience, especially thinking how bad our lives may be. And then we hear a brother or sister talk, and it's like, well, okay, some people have it worse. That's not a bad thing. And it's not that anybody's complaining. That's part of bearing one another's burdens, I would like to think.
I was thinking about this one of whoever cannot stand being in community should beware being alone. And it might be stretching to say they don't want to be in community. I'm thinking of those who say, I can be Christian and not go to church or not go to Christian community. That's different than those who eventually are homebound and desire, right?
Sure.
Part of community, because there's that desire. But I know I have in my family and other places I know who say like, I'm okay here. Maybe they read devotions, maybe not, or they're like, I'm Christian, and it's like, are you without community, without that desire, you know, for community? I think Christ does meet you, but I think there is something missing.
Well, I completely agree, because as I always told my kids, whenever they were griping about something, my answer was always, it's not about you. And I think we need to keep that in our slogan book as well, that, well, okay, so you feel like you don't need to go to church, but the church needs you to be there. You know, is if you think that you're self-sufficient, first, you're deluding yourself. But secondly, other people need you to be around. And I think that's part of community too. And Bonhoeffer didn't quite use this vocabulary, but I think he would have been completely in agreement with that idea that being a part of the church isn't always for us. Yes, it is, but that shouldn't be our aim. I mean, how many people have you heard say in your lifetime, well, I just don't get anything out of church? Well, do you contribute anything to church? And I don't mean financially by any means. I mean, it's kind of like a theologization of John F. Kennedy's ask not what your church can do for you, ask what you can do for your church. And I think that simple notion of service, not just being an usher, not just cleaning up, the church, but of service of making yourself available to others so that, just like we said, we can hear the voice of God in the voice of our sisters and brothers. Well, in the same way, you might be the voice of God for a sister or brother who happens to need it at that very moment. So it is it's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would call what was the word he used? An unmitigated Christianity, or where it's he used a certain phrase. And now,
I was like, I got cheap grace, costly grace. I'm trying to think of other Bonhoeffer.
He said it's for crying out loud. Anyway, when he says, when we think that we can have a solo relationship with God, an unmediated, not mitigated, mediated, that we have an unmediated relationship. He's not talking about priest. He's not talking about, like the Roman Catholic sense of the priest is the mediator, between the congregation and God and all like that. No, he's saying that when we think that we can be isolated and have this one-on-one relationship with God, as people like to talk about, he says there's only one word for that. It's paganism. Well, that's a bit of a harsh word, but I think I agree with him, because if we talk about and not seeing Christ in sisters and brothers, not being Christ to sisters and brothers, then maybe that is paganism. That we need each other. We need the community, and the community needs us. And once again, if I'm not getting anything out of it, probably it's because I'm not putting anything into it. It's just that simple. And that's definitely, Bonhoeffer was pretty adamant about that. That, you know what? How many times do we say you get out what you put into it? Well, that wasn't necessarily said about the church, but it could be. But even then, the trap is to think, well, I should go to church and I should be good to other people, and I should make sure that because I want to get something out of it. Well, that would be eros, Bonhoeffer would say. That agape is, I'm just going to give what the Lord has put into me, and he'll take care of me. That's a pretty good way to live, I think.
Yeah, I'm also thinking here too about others who have actually been rejected from a faith community, because that's a different reason to not be present, and that's an issue of, and this has come up in recent conversations, particularly around LGBTQ folks, or others who have, because in our pandemic time of like more YouTube videos and all of this, that does allow some people who are at home, on their own, to be able to participate in worship. And it is reaching some people who want to be part of community, have that desire, but are scared and about being hurt and and not welcomed. So that's a different category of this that makes me think that when I do, and maybe this is true for you in your life, if you are talking to someone who doesn't participate in church, like asking some questions of like what could change that would want you to go, or has something happened that pushed you away from the church, right? Like to get curiosity about their story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there are people who, well, I was one of them, for crying out loud. I didn't go for a while because, man, I was just tired of getting whipped on. I mean, at least that's the way it felt. Again, my case was no different than anybody else's, no worse, but it hurt. I mean, and it just, you get a little tired of it. And, Nicole was like, my church ain't really like that. Yeah, sure it is. Of course, every church is like that, you say in your haughtiness. And then you go and you go, oh, what a nice bunch. And the fact is I met Chuck years ago. I don't know what, Chuck, probably 20 years ago, I guess, something like that. And Chuck told me about this nice Lutheran church he went to, and he enjoyed it and he was happy there and all that stuff. And of course, and I was very happy for him, but I thought, wouldn't work for me. I've been around too much of that to see to even trust, but once again, you step out in faith or you step out in love for somebody else, that if it's good for her, then it'll be good for me just to be there with her. And then you find out, oh, I kind of like this. I kind of like these people. In fact, I've told the story before, but when she and I went to the first service together, that we went up, took communion. When I sat down, I might have even said it out loud to myself, but I just said, welcome home. And so once again, I got to start giving into a community. I mean, even like, a class like this, which is just, loads of fun, but I don't know. Being alone didn't cut it, but at the time, being alone was about the only option. And so I definitely understand those folks who I was one, who just was like, man, I just can't get in there. Well, that's okay. And you know what? Let's consider it a sabbatical, and someday you'll come back, maybe, if you want to. But in the meantime, maybe I can be the church to you until such a time that you can be back in, a larger community. What was it? St. Francis said, sometimes you're the only gospel people see. And we have to take that seriously,
Chuck, were you going to add to the reflections from 20 years ago? Or unmuted. I didn't know if that was you or Wanda prompting.
I didn't know him 20 years ago.
Okay.
No, but I remember the first class that was with Travis. It was at Marrier's, and I was just so thrilled with that class because that's the way I thought, and I felt, well, you hear so much that isn't like that. And I says, no, God is love. And that should be the core,
Yeah.
Everything else that detracts from that, I think, is not of God,
No. It was the Agape and Eros class, wasn't it? Is that what it was?
I think it was on.
Oh,
was
Galatians.
Ephesians.
Oh, Ephesians. Okay. Yeah. That's right. Well, yeah. And the funny thing is I remember seeing Chuck sitting there, and there was a light in his eye. And even after the first or second class, I think you came up to me and said, "This is what I've always believed." And yeah, deep down inside, I think it's what all of us have longed for, is that kind of expression of agape, that, we've felt it, we've received it. And, like you said, surely freely you receive, now freely give. Well, that's the ball game. That's what we got. That's what we should be giving. And to those who we become church for, who can't make it to a building, and for those who are sitting next to us or in front of us or behind us in a pew. Yeah. And it's really so easy, but we make it so hard that we think that it means giving up something. It doesn't. I mean, it means being ourselves, or at least, being Christ. And that should be easy. But I mean, when we talk about even the word Christian, that everybody wants to be a Christian and they think it means to be a follower of Christ. Well, okay, yeah, that's part of it, but that's just following rules. The word Christian, when it was first used, it was kind of meant derogatorily by the Romans, and it meant to be a little Christ. You know, all these people, they think they're a little Christ. Yeah, that's what we want to be. That's not an insult. And that's what we should strive to be. Nicole and I were talking with a friend of mine who's a pastor out in Maryland, and we were kind of like, because he was wondering what's the church going to look like after the pandemic. Are they so many people don't want to come back to church, and so many but he was talking about what is it, how do we know the will of God? And I said, I think it's easy. It's just simply loving people the way they need to be loved, not the way we want to love. And there's probably the trick, and I'm talking way too much, sorry. But there's the thing, is that we always love people the way we want to love and not the way they need to be loved. That's what agape does, is what do you need? I'll be that. What are we talking about? Being all things to all people, or Jung said, be all things to all people, but still be unchanged inside. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Other thoughts, Deans?
In that case, oh, sorry.
With that one, you make me, I think I wrote this for one of the local papers about the platinum rule. Like we have the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But that platinum one, it shows up around a number of places online, but do unto others as they would ask, like that you treat them, right?
Yes. Yes.
From their context, that sometimes the way that you would want to be treated, you have barriers, your own baggage, whatever you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This what's actually better for them. Mm-hmm.
Right. A guy, what was his name? Gary Smalley, I think, wrote a book some years ago called The Love Languages. Mm-hmm. And he talks about, some people, they like to receive words of affirmation.
Words of affirmation. Yes.
Oh, that's you?
Yes.
All right. We'll keep that in mind, Pastor Elizabeth, thou great and wonderful one who nourishes us every Sunday with the words. You asked for it now. There's and then there was
quality time.
Quality time
together, and gift giving, like really thoughtful about gifts.
Yep, that's right.
Acts of service.
Acts of service. Yep.
And then touch. That's one I always forget because that's not one. I mean, physical touch is fine, but for those who it's that your love language, how you receive love, like that's that's
exactly. Which in the interest of full disclosure, touch is mine. I mean, and I wind up doing that to people. Like, I'll, grab Chuck and, shake him by the shoulder or something like that. Or, I'm always doing that. And then I have to realize that might freak him out a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. But yeah. So just holding hands with Nicole, man, that's it for me. And somebody can say all kinds of nice things, but talk's cheap. Keep that to yourself. You want to show me you love me, just give me a hug or something like that. Which in the frozen north, yeah, good luck with that. That's why being born in the South when everybody's hugging each other was a cool thing. So I've had to learn to adapt to other things that still.
But I think you said that you should have like two primary ones, right?
Yes.
And this is new to people. If it's something, it is something that I have found helpful. And there might be some others that you would add to his list, but if it's something that's new to you, I would encourage you, especially in your marriage relationship. It's something you might already know about your partner, but if you haven't put it to words, to know how they like to be appreciated.
Chuck will send you the book.
Phenomenal. Wedding present.
But my point was in that way of, because he's
Chuck, what?
say it again, Chuck.
I'll be waiting.
But his point was that, you know, that okay, I like touch and everything like that, but I can't think that everybody is affected that way. So we find out that Pastor Elizabeth likes the word of affirmation. Well, then that's how we show our affection, is by words like that to her. Or somebody else likes acts of service, or somebody else like. So the thing is that, yeah, if I'll show my affection in the way I like, but I should also keep that in mind for what you like, what best touches you. In that all that to get to say that's the way we should love too, among brothers and sisters, is we should, you know, what is it that you need? What do you need to hear from the Lord? You know, what word from the Lord can I give you? Not just what I want to tell you, but what do you need to hear? And that's got to be the trickiest thing of all, because, yeah, when people go out of their way to try to speak for God, you wind up with all kinds of spookiness. You wind up with false prophets. But anyway, I think that the best way to speak for God, to be the word of Christ to somebody, is simply to speak in love. That's why Paul says that we're speaking the truth in love, which to me I always read as, it's not the truth if it's not in love. Otherwise, it's just factually accurate. That the truth has to have love accompanying it. Otherwise, it's just, I mean, who is it? Well, Luther, I think, when he wrote to Philip Melanchthon, he said that that the truth without love is a harsh taskmaster. And yeah, how many times are we told in Scripture to let love be the final word always? Well, that's how we minister to each other. That's how we're Christ to each other. That's how we live in community, is by being love for each other. Well, in the second question, Bonhoeffer says, silence means nothing other than waiting for God's word, Raymond, and coming from God's word with a blessing. Silence at the beginning and at the end of day, or silence at the beginning and at the end. Oh, no, what I meant to write was aloneness at the beginning and at the end of day is about silence. So what does he have to say, do you recall, about Christian silence? If you'll recall, that's on like, actually, yeah, we're still kind of on the next page from where we were about alone and all like that.
You say solitude, silence, or?
Yeah, the day, solitude at the beginning and at the end of the day is all about silence. But he concludes, before we move on too far, he goes, the day together will be unfruitful without the day alone, both for the community and for the individual. That's an important thing to remember before we leave question number 1 there. So then he goes on to say the mark of solitude is silence, just as speech is the mark of community. Silence and speech have the same interconnection and distinction as do being alone and community. One does not exist without the other. Genuine speech comes out of silence, and genuine silence comes out of speech. So, and then he goes on to say that in the beginning of the day, we talked about that last week. Why silence at the beginning? You recall?
The morning belonging to the Lord. Is that the?
Yep. And we wait on the word of the Lord. Mm-hmm. That we begin the day in our solitude with the silence of waiting to hear God's word, whatever that may be. You know, whether it's cracking open the Bible and having a look, or just looking out the window. You know, that the word of the Lord comes to us in many different ways, and if we're willing to listen, and if we're still enough to listen, but that's hard to do in a fast-paced world with iPhones and radio alarm clocks and all like that. To wake up in silence is not so easy anymore. Easier to go to bed and contemplate at the end of the day, but the beginning of the day, we usually hit the ground running, and it sets a pace. Well, he says, he says, pardon me. Silence does not mean being incapable of speech, just as speech does not mean idle talk. Being incapable of speech does not create solitude, and idle talk does not create community. Silence is the excess, the inebriation, the sacrifice of speech. But being incapable of speech is not holy. It is like a thing that has only been mutilated, not sacrificed. Zachary was incapable of speech rather than being silent. If he had accepted the revelation, he may have perhaps come out of the temple not being incapable of speaking, but of silence. That was from Ernst Hello. That just not talking isn't silence. That there is something that goes with silence, and that's anticipation. That's listening. So silence isn't just about the absence of speech, it is the activity of listening, Bonhoeffer says.
I like that, the activity of listening. And I'm curious, I think for some folks on this, you might be better at silence than I am. I don't know, I'll speak for myself. I'm not great at it. I think that's one of the reasons this chapter, I connected with it, because it's something that I crave more, is some of that solitude and listening. And I know that, and I really appreciate when someone else helps hold that space for me, because I do connect with the holy. And so I am curious for those on, you know, our call tonight, is this something that's easier for you or harder? Is there something you've discovered that has made a time of listening, or just that the sort of silence that's not just stillness? Not just a lack of talk, but
right.
What have you done? Is it a walk through the woods? I know that.
Yep.
Watching the birds.
Yep.
Is that, or which part? Or
just being in nature, being in nature, and staying away from monitors and phones and all those distractions that I find interrupt my day all the time. But yeah.
When you take your dogs on walks, which helps to get out, right? Or just,
yeah. And sometimes just like looking out the window, like at, you know, trees or birds or, you know, nature, just that kind of helps. Just, silence your mind.
Obviously, silence is very difficult for me.
That's why we're a good pair.
I don't know if you use this phrase. I so appreciate Nathan for this. He's the one that came up with it, but it's like, I now know, I was like, honey, can I borrow your ears? Like, I really actually don't have to respond, because I'm thinking out loud, and if somebody's listening who could point out if I'm like, you know, not thinking clearly, but like I literally don't know what I'm thinking until I say it out loud sometimes. So.
Sure.
Yeah. And that way.
Yeah, and it's better if somebody's listening to me, even if like he literally doesn't have to respond. Borrow your ears. How about for others? Anything that comes to mind as we think about taking times of silence? Maybe you're like, I got tons of silence. I'm good.
Clarification, when I raised my hand earlier, there are times when I do like to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I guess, shows the farm boy in me. Being around livestock has always been kind of relaxing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Although it might not be a relaxing moment because of what's happening, but it's a part that I thoroughly enjoy. And I enjoy being around people, but there are times. And the part that I missed that I was around up until my early 20s quite readily is I was always around horses. And then you could take off, go on other people's land. It didn't make any difference. And I was in an area where we had a neighbor about a quarter of a mile from us, but the next one was about a half a mile to 2 miles away. So in Nebraska, it's, you know, social distancing is easy there. And now most of those farms are gone. But I would just take off. And then I look back, as even at a younger age, my folks would let me do that. My mother always seemed calm about it. I had to drive her nuts, because the only way she would know where I was possibly with, you know, she would look at the horse tracks and see where they went, you know, and that kind of narrowed down for her to at least 1 out of 4 direction. But had some real good times that way.
Chuck or Wanda, were you going to say something? You had unmuted.
Well, I often think the term is active listening, or any kind of a silence. You're paying attention to the other person, what they're saying and so forth, and trying to get that all in your head or whatever. It's just not, you're not spaced out listening to them.
Yes, that's the other thing, is when I ask you the question, I say, okay, you let me know when we can talk about it. Like, are you ready with an answer yet? Or like, give me like 2-minute tap, like, you know, like what's the time? I know you need to think inside your head. And this time of silence isn't just, this is you actually thinking about it. So.
Well, and Chuck hits on a good point too, is active listening isn't just hearing. And it's not just, you know, I think it was my grandfather who told me, there are people who are listening and paying attention to what the other person is saying. And then there are people who are simply waiting for their turn to talk. Mm-hmm. Man, oh man, that made me, even at a young age, I wanted to hear. I wanted to listen. I didn't want to, you know, and I always liked, when I was a kid, I always liked hanging out with what at the time I called older people, but now I realize they were probably my age. But hanging, and even when I was in college, I loved hanging out with these people who were taking classes, even though they had retired. But one guy had been a speechwriter for Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Another one had written for the Boston Globe. Another one was he was in the Metropolitan Opera Company, and his wife was a Radio City Rockette back in the day. I could just listen to these people for hours, and people were always asking me, why are you hanging around with these old people? You know, I'm like, because they've done everything and we haven't done anything. We're just fresh out of high school, for crying out loud. And these guys have these great old stories. And yeah, I learned the art of listening a long time ago, and it was the best thing that I think my grandfather could have taught me. Was, you know, sure, when somebody's talking, we may think of, oh, I want to address that, but not to follow your own trail. And for me, that was always a mark of a good sermon, is if I tracked with the pastor, and you're very good at this, Pastor. But there are others when I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to look in his hymn book and see what I can read in there. Or worse, when I was a kid, we would play Connect the Dots in the back of the hymn book. And whenever, you know, it would be discovered, then I would always be the one in trouble, you know. But yeah, learning to listen, Chuck, you're exactly right. You know, that's part of ministry too, is, I mean, you know, what do counselors really do except listen? And, you know, a guy named Henri Nouwen wrote a book called The Wounded Healer, and he was talking about the ministry of presence. And he said, you don't need to say anything. You don't need to do anything. Just be there. Let them talk if they want to talk. Let them be silent if they want to. Just be there. That ministry of presence was, well, that's part of silence too. Sometimes we're silent together. Nicole and I will, and we said this to each other kind of early on, is like, you know, it's kind of great that we can drive and not have to fill the car up with words. Mm-hmm. I know you don't believe that about me. but
I was going to say that rarely happens.
See, can we mute her? but to not have to, and most importantly, not to dread what might be coming from the other side of the car, has always been a delightful thing to just, you know, be in each other's presence and not have to do anything, not have to fill it up. And she lets me talk when I want to talk. And it's usually a song comes on the radio and I just have to tell her about who recorded this and why they were in that studio and who the bass player was. And, you know, and she politely goes, that's nice. So yeah, she lets me talk and I let her be silent. But there are times when, and they're absolutely wonderful times when we're sitting in front of the window just watching the snow fall, you know, or driving someplace, or, you know, there's a time for silence together too, not just alone, as Bonhoeffer's talking about in this particular part, but when we're together, that time of silence is pretty moving. You know, I always get a little bit disappointed sometimes when folks who want to have prayer but are afraid to do it, and they'll say, let's have a moment of silence, you know, and I'm like, okay, moment of silence. Well, that means we can pray during this. I don't know what their prayers would look like, but I don't even get untracked before they go amen. I didn't even get the introductions done. I mean, oh, holy cow. So yeah, silence without any point. Well, what's the good of that? It's just not talking.
Another wondering or practice that I've experienced recently is in having some times of silence together on a Zoom call, of doing what's called body work, and but as you maybe you're praying or just, you know, settling yourself with your, you know, feet on the ground, and as you breathe, but actually to feel your body and feel your feelings. And I don't know for your background how in touch you are or are not with how we're feeling, but it's part of our sort of the white supremacy culture, the like dominant culture here, where we're disconnected a lot. And I know this is true from my like German ethnic background, but it's become sort of that dominant part in white culture of being disconnected from what we're feeling into our body. And that is a part for me in silence of actually, for me, it takes a little while to like see what I'm feeling, or to and to be okay with expressing emotion or grief. And this goes, there's things around like gender lines or assumptions about, you know, who cries or not, or how, or even feeling joy, right? But to actually feel your feelings in your body.
Right.
So yeah, and maybe that's not an issue for you. If it isn't, praise be to God, but it's a lot of us.
Well, you know, there are times when, and this is a part of being together also, is, like Nicole will ask me sometimes, is everything okay? Yeah. You sure? Yeah. Well, I came to learn that when she asked me that, it's time to stop and think, like, well, wait a minute. I thought I was okay, but you know what? I'm hacked off about something. You know, so
you don't,
not her,
and not knowing what your body's saying. This came from a friend who's a dancer. She's super aware of her body, and she's now a pastor, and was saying, I had to learn to, like, because I would ask people, because like she perceived more than what was going on, and she had to learn to be like, oh nope, you don't want to talk about that, you don't want to acknowledge that there's something going on. Okay, but,
That's right.
but to her, like, she could read it, you know, she could read that in your body. So yeah,
we sometimes go to Michelle Boehm, who's the reflexologist over in Thorpe, and so she'll be working on your feet or something, and she'll go, "Ooh, you're tense." No, I'm not. Oh wait, maybe I am. So, okay. Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Chiropractors, reflexologists are another place to get connected.
They are. Yes, they are. Yep. One last thing is Bonhoeffer talks about intercessory prayer.
I feel like we talked about this a bit in our last session. I mean, we got there, like, sort of we just pray about somebody during the day if they come in your mind. And then I was rereading the chapter for tonight. I don't know if anybody else was like, wait, didn't we?
We did. I got ahead of things.
Yeah. Well, it's all connected, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But his description of intercessory prayer.
And did it ring true? I mean, is that what you find is his description?
Do you want to read the passage? Is there a particular passage that you're talking about?
Let's see. It is, in intercessory prayer, the faith that may have been strange and intolerable to me is transformed into the face of one for whom Christ died. Oh, man. That just gets me every time. The face of a pardoned sinner. You know, again, I know I talk a lot about my grandfather and things that he said, but one time he said, and it rings true here, he said, if I really understand somebody, I can't hate them. Well, I think intercessory prayer helps us with that, is just like he says, by looking at them as someone who is loved by Christ and who is pardoned by Christ, how can I hold anything against them? How can I, and so, boy, doesn't that become intercessory then? When you no longer, hold them in not just disregard, but even contempt, but then to hold them in prayer before the throne of God, as we say, it just changes everything. Or President Lincoln said, if I make my enemies my friends, haven't I destroyed my enemies? I mean, all of that is right on target. And I think prayer does that. I mean, I have found myself praying for people who I absolutely in my flesh despised. But the minute I could start thinking about them as someone who is redeemed by Christ, who is loved by Christ, that Christ came to rescue. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a different ballgame then. I can't feel that anymore. That's not to say it's a one-time thing. There are some people you have to do it day after day after day after day. But that's the practice of intercessory prayer, is I have to look at them in that way. I have to see the face of a pardoned sinner. He says,
I want to pause there for a moment, because as you were talking, I started to get an inkling or a couple images in my head of people maybe who I'm feeling called to pray for right now. I don't know, just take a moment and in your life, like, who, you don't have to say out loud, but like hold them, who came to mind for you, of somebody it's been hard to pray for, or where there is a rift or hatred, or or however, whatever strength of language you want to use. And to, what did he say, to remember, he's they're a redeemed sinner, and to have them have the face of Christ, is that?
Yeah. Yep. The face that may have been strange and intolerable to me is transformed into the face of one for whom Christ died.
Mm-hmm.
He says, as far as we are concerned, there is no dislike, no personal tension, no disunity or strife that cannot be overcome by intercessory prayer. Nothing that can. That's, I mean, back to the point we were just making. The minute you start to realize them, no matter how much I dislike them, no matter how much contempt I might have for them, no matter how much, personal tension may be, the minute I see Christ in them, a person for whom Christ died, it's got to change. I mean, yeah. He says, offering intercessory prayer means nothing other than Christians bringing one another into the presence of God, seeing each other under the cross of Jesus as poor human beings and sinners in need of grace. Their need and their sin become so heavy and oppressive to me that I feel as if it were my own, and I can do nothing else but bid, Lord, you yourself, you alone, deal with them according to your firmness and your goodness. Thus it is clear that intercessory prayer is also a daily service Christians owe to God and one another. Finally, he says, we can no longer close our eyes to the realization that the ministry of intercession demands time of every Christian, but most of all, the pastor on whom the needs of the whole community of faith rest. Sorry, Pastor. The very time we give to intercession will turn out to be a daily source of new joy in God and in the Christian congregation. If we're all praying for each other and we're all holding each other up and we're all carrying the burdens of each other, and it doesn't always mean that you tell me what it is and that I actively help you in some way. It just means that I've got your name in God's face. That's what the community is supposed to do.
I think that I was going over past newsletters, and I think Pastor Brian put out a section of the directory to pray over. Or is that, am I misremembering?
Yeah.
I feel like I saw something there, right, to help encourage that.
I don't remember the whole details now, but yeah, there was names each month or week or what, Nicole?
Right. Yeah.
And one thing, some people didn't get what that was right away.
No.
And everything was, well, what's wrong with so-and-so? Or they would call somebody up, I'm sorry, and what about?
They're praying for me. What is it?
Yeah. Right.
And some people,
one benefit of having our new directory, maybe there's still a couple addresses that need fixing, but the names are actually pretty accurate.
yeah.
As something to pray through. Yeah, I mean, I like that sort of communal piece together.
Yeah.
It needs a little bit of an introduction, though.
Yes.
That's my experience.
But what introduction would, I mean, this piece of intercession just got me thinking. I mean, yes, we are doing, prayers for ourselves and others each Sunday. And people are praying during the week, particularly over the prayer list and other things. But it makes me think of, in Kansas City, there's a different kind of IHOP, the International House of Prayer is there. And I've experienced it really powerfully when I was a young adult being down there, and they have a 24-hour prayer room. All these people praying, and that particular expression of it and some other things tend to be more seen as charismatic or American evangelical, but I think that our Lutheran churches, we have a really prayerful people. We don't either talk about doing it or gather together for it. Not just a charismatic thing or a evangelical thing.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah, I think it'd be a great idea to have that. But also, got to be honest, Pastor, I'm not trying to, give you anything to insert in the service, but what if every service you took 3 or 4 names. I mean, by the end of the year, you've gotten through everybody, you know, maybe a couple of times, because I think that hearing my name called by you would
it be by me or yes, by me. I'm also wondering, one of the things we've done at Emmanuel, because it's a little bit easier and it also helps engage kids, is we hand out different parts of the service, and even the different intercessory prayers, I'm cutting them up and different people pray it.
Right.
So it's more participatory worship. But I was thinking like so for me to say that, or to have people in the pews read off names, I don't know, or take names from or yeah. But I like that of when we can insert that. Yeah, see how many names we need to do per year to we have like 200 plus family names, so yeah. 3 a week would get us through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something to put into, like, since I've been doing weekly emails, you know, to add, like, here's the people to pray over this week.
Yeah.
You know? Praying through the directory or something.
Mm-hmm.
With additional explanation.
I wasn't trying to dominate that, what to do. But what happened in some of the other deal, people didn't know why their name was there. Got very upset. Very upset. I was council president then, and I got more than one phone call. And then, oh, that's what it's about? Okay. You know, and then, but in the meantime, they've been hopping mad. You know, we're talking about the silent part in the prayer. If I could just intersect a thought I had here a little bit ago, it was one of those aha moments. My dad used to make a comment lots of times, well, it's time to have a talk with myself. Well, it took me a long time to realize, and I really understand more now, that was more of being off by himself and having a prayer.
Yeah.
He really didn't mean himself when he said it. But
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Like, I screwed this up, Lord, help me out.
Yeah, that's right.
That type of, that was his way of saying it.
Yeah. I like that.
Let me read the last passage to you. He says, every member serves the whole body, contributing either to its health or to its ruin. For we are members of one body, not only when we want to be, but in our whole existence. This is not a theory, but a spiritual reality that is often experienced in the Christian community with shocking clarity, sometimes destructively, and sometimes beneficially. Those who return to the community of Christians who live together after a successful long day bring with them the blessing of their solitude, but they themselves receive anew the blessing of the community. Blessed are those who are alone in the strength of their community. Blessed are those who preserve community in the strength of solitude. But the strength of solitude and the strength of community is the strength of the Word of God alone, which is meant for the individual in the community. Good stuff. Well, 2 weeks from now, no, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. We will be back and we'll have more discussion question from chapter 4, which is service. But before we wrap up, is there anything anybody wants to add or ask or?
I was just thinking of, oh, sorry. Did somebody else have a thing?
I don't think so.
Thinking about ending with scripture and praying the Psalms. Psalm 46 comes to mind when thinking about silence and stillness. So I'll just read it all because it's not that long. So this is Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city, it shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shield with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. That command to be still comes in the midst of the swirling, right? So those midst of, it just, feels like it ties in so much for what we've been talking about, that solitude, that prayer, that life alone or life in the community.
Yeah, yeah.
And God is in the midst of the city, in the midst of where we dwell.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks be to God.
Yep.